A frantic rescue effort began during the noon hour in West London today. Workers desperately scrambling to free others who were trapped when a high-rise under construction collapsed. One worker was reported as vital signs absent and others were injured or trapped until help could get to them. And Victoria Hospital declared a code orange, their official status for receiving casualties during a community disaster, though that was later dropped. Good evening, I'm Rita Ismail. Thank you for joining us. 2 workers are in fair condition in hospital at this hour. 1 is in serious condition and 1 is in critical condition. 1 has sadly died. Emergency crews remain on the scene at this hour, and that's where we find our Daryl Newcomb, who joins us live with the latest. Daryl.
Well, Rita, the questions are mounting just hours after this partial collapse of an apartment building that was under construction. And video filmed immediately after the collapse shows the chaos that followed. You can hear calls for help moments after the 4-story wall collapsed on top of 7 workers inside an apartment building under construction at 555 Teeple Terrace. Javier Caranton, who shot the video, says concrete was being poured on the 4th floor at the time.
In one moment, a little collection, yeah, down.
The partial collapse occurred on the east side of the building around 11:45 in the morning. Courtney Snell was leaving her home when she witnessed the aftermath.
Probably about 20 workers running out of the building. And I actually ended up catching one of them, and he said that they were pouring concrete inside and a part of the building had collapsed.
Emergency crews launched a massive rescue effort with 7 workers trapped under the rubble. They could be seen maneuvering through piles of debris, providing aid to the injured.
The building was a 4-story building. I'm not sure at what point of construction the building was under. I do know that there is a considerable amount of debris.
About 4 hours after the collapse, an unusual scene even at a significant catastrophe. Multiple healthcare workers arriving in surgical scrubs. Physicians from LHSC's Victoria Hospital assisted in an extraction, and the hospital temporarily declared a code orange, indicating it was dealing with multiple patients with severe injuries in the emergency room. Numerous construction workers were seen lingering around the site for hours after the collapse, awaiting word about their friends and colleagues.
He said that some of his friends were still in the building and he was just shaking.
At this moment, emergency crews continue their work, attempting to free the final individual that was involved in this incident. Police are asking Londoners to please avoid the area tonight. Rita?
Thanks so much, Daryl. Recovery work is underway to remove a deceased worker from the rubble of a construction site in the city's West End. The worker is the 2nd person to be pronounced dead after part of a building that was under construction collapsed just before noon on Friday. CTV's Brent Lale has the latest on the collaborative efforts, which are expected to take some time.
It has gone from construction to deconstruction at 555 Teeple Terrace.
The City of London, London Police and London Fire are working collaboratively to try and get the individual out of the building. Because of the structure of the building and the integrity right now, that could be a while.
Shortly before noon Friday, part of a 4-story building in West London collapsed, killing 2 people and injuring 4 others. A worker inside at the time says concrete was being poured on the 4th floor when the collapse happened. Neighbor Phil Hauser was walking by at the time.
It just all were running out fast, and it wasn't until I got close enough to see their faces to realize something bad had happened. I was still trying to digest it.
The Brock Development Group of London is the developer of the apartment building called The Nest on Wonderland. Developer Michelle Dornbush was distraught on scene, declining an on-camera interview with CTV News. She did say she didn't sleep last night, calling it a sad day. In a statement, she says an investigation has begun to determine the cause of the accident. We are cooperating fully with the regulatory authorities as they carry out their investigation. The concepts for this building go back nearly 7 years.
In the beginning, there was a tree clearing on the site behind us that kind of led to a lot of conflict in the neighborhood. Eventually, development applications came forward. There's been a lot of movement to try and make sure that this is something compatible with the neighborhood.
Ward 11 Councillor Stephen Turner, a former paramedic, offered condolences and is appreciative of the first responders who flocked to the scene Friday.
I know the complexity of a heavy urban search and rescue scene like this, the amount of advanced patient care that's brought to this, the complex engineering and rescue work, and the long investigation that's going to happen from here on out.
We reached out to Labour Minister Monty McNaughton, who says the ministry has turned the scene over to the Ontario Fire Marshal's office, who are leading the recovery efforts. He added ministry inspectors will be on site as recovery efforts continue. However, the Ontario Fire Marshal's office will continue to control the scene until the recovery is completed. As the investigation gets underway as to the cause of the collapse, the victims have not been identified. Leuna Local 1059, who represents construction workers in southwestern Ontario, does not believe the workers are their members.
Out of respect for the families at this time, we're not sharing any further information with respect to the individuals who are deceased, as well as the individuals who are currently in hospital.
Brent Lale, CTV News.
The recovery mission to remove a trapped construction worker from a collapsed building completed today. And tonight, as CTV's Brent Lale reports, we're learning about the two victims who lost their life and what's next for the families as they grieve their loved ones.
A new memorial has been placed at 555 Teeple Terrace. Two construction vests and hard hats with the words "Rest in Peace, Gentlemen" are tied to the fence. They represent the two victims in Friday's building collapse.
This is such a sad weekend. And I can tell you all that London is devastated. I need to express and wish to express our deepest condolences to the victims.
21-year-old John Martins of Glen Meyer, south of Tillsonburg, was the man pulled from the rubble late Saturday night. Henry Harder of Springfield leaves behind a wife and a 3-week-old baby. The victims have been identified by Lighthouse Gospel Church in Port Burwell, where funeral services will be held later this week.
The families are deeply devastated by this tragedy. They are families of faith, deep faith in God.
Pastor Herman Buchert says what is helping these families is the support from their faith community.
So we're here to provide psychological help, mental, emotional help, spiritual help, and we'll continue to be here in the weeks and months to come for these families.
London Police Chief Steve Williams says Victim Services is available to add additional support to family, friends, and co-workers of those affected.
Members of our Crisis Intervention Victim Services Unit, as well as Victim Services Middlesex London, who attended the scene on Friday as part of our initial rapid response to deal with those who were affected. That support continues today. So if anybody is in need of that support, please contact London Police.
A pair of GoFundMe pages set up to help the victims' families have each already raised over $60,000. Brent Lale, CTV News.
Now that both victims have been recovered from the site, investigators begin the task of figuring out what happened. CTV's Brian Bicknell has more.
For the first time since Friday, the activity has quieted down at this Teeple Terrace construction site, but now begins the work of trying to figure out what went wrong.
Up until last night, it was, again, rescue and recovery. Now it's about hitting the pause button and gathering information from everybody who was there.
London Police Chief Steve Williams told a news conference police will work closely with the Ministry of Labour, but it's going to take time.
This is the time to really slow things down. The role of the police right now is to assist the Ministry of Labour in their investigation and also assist the Office of the Coroner, whose mandate will come into play as well. So we're gathering information. It's too early to draw any conclusions whatsoever.
As for the building itself, no word yet on whether it's going to be rebuilt or whether it has to come down. For now, it is left in the hands of provincial investigators. The head of emergency management for London, Dave O'Brien, says once the ministry has completed its investigation, city officials will work with the building owner to determine what's next.
In terms of ensuring the safety of the building and any future actions that are required moving forward on that property to ensure it remains safe, and the owner will decide what the next steps are in terms of any reconstruction, etc.
Brian Bicknell, CTV News.
Ontario's Labour Minister says he'll spare no expense in finding out what went wrong on Friday that cost 2 workers their lives at a London construction site. In the meantime, the construction industry is still coming to grips with the tragedy. CTV's Brian Bicknell has more.
Caution tape and a privacy fence surround this Cheaple Terrace construction site, but the only work being done is that of investigators and provincial inspectors. Labour Minister Monty McNaughton says he's determined to find out what went wrong that cost 2 workers their lives.
Every worker deserves to go home to their family safely after a hard day's work. We're going to spare no expense. We'll move mountains if we have to get answers as quickly as possible for these families who are impacted by this tragedy.
21-year-old John Martins of Glenmire near Tillsonburg and 26-year-old Henry Harder of Springfield were killed when part of the building collapsed on Friday. 4 others were injured. One worker on scene Friday told CTV News concrete was being poured on the 4th floor when the collapse occurred. Even with the weekend to digest just what happened here, a shockwave is still being felt throughout the construction community. Industry representatives telling us that such an incident with such tragic consequences is extremely rare. Flags were lowered to half-mast at the London and District Construction Association on Monday.
It's exceptionally close to home, and not only from our member contractors that were on the job, but for any and all contractors that were on the job and their employees. As I said, this extends way beyond just LDCA.
There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of trades on site, and safety is paramount in a lot of those cases.
The LDCA says it's coming up with a plan to offer support to the victims' families. In the meantime, Monty McNaughton is calling on businesses to do more to protect workers.
This is also a wake-up call to every business across the province. They have to step up. They have to be more vigilant to protect the health and safety of workers. And I want every worker in the province to know that if they feel unsafe on a job site, in a workplace, they can refuse work.
A coroner's inquest into the deaths will also take place. Brian Bicknell, CTV News.
Still reeling from a tragic loss, a family and a community came together to lay to rest one of the 2 men who died during the building collapse on Cheaple Terrace on Friday. Friends and family gathered this afternoon at the Lighthouse Gospel Church in Port Burwell for the funeral of 26-year-old Henry Harder. Harder leaves behind a wife and a baby girl born just 3 weeks ago.
He was a very proud daddy and loved their daughter very much. Henry had said in the past, all babies look the same, but not this one. This one was special, dear to him. He thought the world of their daughter, and he loved his wife very much.
Pastor John Dick described Henry Harder as a quiet man who opened up after meeting Margaret, the woman he married just over 2 years ago. Dick expressed appreciation for the outpouring of support for Harder's family and others impacted by the tragedy. And he thanked the first responders who came to the scene to try to help Henry Harder and the other workers at the construction scene. He revealed that Henry's 3 brothers were also working at the Cheaple Terrace construction site when the collapse happened.
Henry and his 3 brothers, along with other construction workers, were working on a 4-story building in London when Henry and his brother were pouring concrete on the roof. When all of a sudden, part of the building collapsed. Henry Harder, along with another young man, John Martins, who was also one of the construction workers, died in this tragic accident. At this time, we don't understand the reasons. We have unanswered questions. Why? Why Henry?
A funeral service for 21-year-old John Martins will be held at Lighthouse Gospel Church on Thursday. 2 lives lost far too soon, and more could have been lost had it not been for the heroic efforts of first responders and fellow construction workers who jumped into action. In cell phone video recorded shortly after the collapse, 2 men are seen frantically trying to rescue others who were trapped. Brent Lale speaks with one of the men in that video in this CTV London exclusive.
I was one of the first person who tried to help for those people, and I saw terrible, horrifying pictures, and it's what's probably never gonna go away.
32-year-old Roland Kovacs is a supervisor for Rick's Metalworks. He was in the basket of a boom lift on the first floor of 555 Teeple Terrace when the building came crashing down.
One guy was just so close to me, and he was just help, and I couldn't leave. I just couldn't leave, and I started throwing rocks.
In cell phone video from moments after the collapse, Kovacs is the man on the right, frantically trying to rescue someone trapped under the rubble.
The noise never heard that before. It was shaking, I think, the whole building. It was that's rumbling, and I'm not trying to be a hero. When someone are crying for help, I have to go. I have to check. Couldn't leave them just screaming. Yeah, I'm right there. I'm just jumped down, and I was throwing those rocks away. And
he's watched the video multiple times where he discovers the man who was trapped. He could be heard yelling for a grinder to cut him free.
I was telling him just to please hold on. They're coming. I could already hear the sirens is just coming, and I was hoping they're coming fast. I told him I got his head in my hands. It was bleeding all over on his head because his head was right open from his forehead, and it's a horrific picture again. It's what he couldn't move. His head was only moving in the concrete, and I told him just hold on, just take some rest. I'm holding your head, and he was crying and please just wipe my eyes. I can't see the concrete in my eye. I can't see, and I told him, just close your eyes. I'm gonna wipe it. A firefighter's finally stepped in the picture, and I had to leave the building.
Kovacs has been told by police that he helped save the man's life and hopes to eventually see him in person and give him a hug. He knows that he and many others inside that day are lucky. And although he didn't know Henry Harder or John Martins, he can feel their family's pain.
I have a 5-year-old at home as well. I have an older boy at home as well. And I have a family. I have my uncle, I have my wife. And I'm just got lucky. And unfortunately, not everyone got lucky on that day. And I think a lot of people feel the same thing. We just got lucky, and I just praying for those families, make sure they're gonna get some peace one day.
Brent Lale, CTV News.
Roland, we thank you for your efforts. Well, there is more to Roland Kovacs' account of the heroic efforts. We have an extended interview with him at ctvnewslondon.ca. Well, grassroots support for the families of Henry Harder and John Martins is gaining momentum. It's coming in the form of financial aid to safety vests hung in front of homes. CTV's Brian Bicknell has more.
A hard hat and a safety vest affixed to a tree, a simple but meaningful gesture of support.
With my daughter, my son, and my significant other working in the construction industry, they work closely amongst each other, and it brought us all to tears just thinking of the families and that those young men aren't going to be home from work.
Homeowner Chrissy Durant says her husband hung one of the first 2 vests along the fence line at the site of the Teeple Terrace construction tragedy. Since then, the movement has grown as households pay tribute to John Martins and Henry Harder, who lost their lives in the building collapse on Friday. Contractor Dan Lalonde didn't know the men, but it still hits home.
A friend of mine put his vest out on his door last night and he posted on Facebook, and I thought that's a great idea. So I followed suit and did it, and you know, I just want to show the families that we're thinking about them. Me personally, like, I lost my stepdad about 18 years ago to a workplace accident, and it just brings back all the memories.
As the on-site memorials continue to grow and as the tributes pour in for these two men, their families are being considered as well. So far, 2 GoFundMe campaigns have raised more than $200,000. Also, the local construction community is stepping up. The London and District Construction Association has decided to create a legacy fund for families and workers impacted by the tragedy. It will include financial support, counseling services, training, and rehabilitation.
We share good times, we share bad times, and this was just an obligation, responsibility on our part to extend the sense of community very specifically into tragedies like this.
The LDCA says it will match contributions from its 500 members for the Legacy Fund. Brian Bicknell, CTV News.
Good evening, I'm Sasha Long. Thanks for joining us. Harrowing stories of survival continue to come out of the construction tragedy on Teeple Terrace. Tonight, we hear the story of a man who suffered serious but non-life-threatening injuries when he fell 3 floors to the ground. Here's CTV's Brent Leal.
All I heard, it sounded like a big train, just a big, loud, scary sound, and I knew something wasn't right, but before you can even react, it just felt like I got hit by a transport truck.
It was Travis Jacklich's last day on the job at 555 Teeple Terrace. He was doing HVAC and sheet metal on the 3rd floor when the building collapsed.
I can actually remember falling through the floors. It was almost I was at peace because I felt like it was it. And next thing you know, you're stuck under rubble and just praying that you'll be found.
Jacklich says he was not the one saved by Roland Kovacs in the cell phone video, but he does recognize him from the job site. He describes that moment when first responders freed him from the debris.
One of the greatest moments of my life. Just, you know, you didn't know if you were going to be found, like I said. You didn't know if something was just going to cave more in on you.
Now he is back home in New Hamburg with his wife, Caitlin, but will have a long recovery.
Just had surgery on his ankle and his fibula. He has 3 plates, and his surgery was successful. And he has
fractured ribs.
Yeah, fractured ribs.
Burns on my face, on my back.
His back is really badly scraped up and really badly burned from the concrete. His eyes were so filled with concrete, they were flushing his eyes constantly. I was so worried he wasn't going to have vision. But his eyes, he had an eye exam and he could read completely, and his eyes are already looking amazing. So, yeah, he's
on my neck.
3 fractures in his spine and 3 fractures in his neck, but they are all minor enough that they're going to heal.
Like many others, he's hoping to find out the reason the building collapsed. But for now, he's feeling the love and support.
I'm just so happy to be home and do the things I never thought I'd be able to do again.
Jacklich was one of 4 injured workers who went to hospital after the collapse. Another, Peter Harder, the brother of the late Henry Harder, was treated and discharged. The identities of the other 2 injured workers have not been released. Brent Leal, CTV News.
We wish them a speedy recovery. Thanks, Brent.